how crucial is China's support to Russia's success in its war?
Oh, it's enormously crucial. Putin would not have begun the 2022 invasion had he not understood that China would back him. You know that he was in Beijing a few weeks before the Beijing Olympics in 2022. And even though it may be that Xi Jinping didn't fully understand the extent of the Russian invasion, clearly Putin believed that China would support Russia. In fact, since 2014, since Russia annexed Crimea, China has been the main economic support for Russia, as it has been during this war. The Chinese have repeated the Russian narrative that it's the West's fault that the war began. They blame NATO for it. Again, as I said, they're a major, the number one or number two, depending on the week, purchaser of Russian oil. And they are providing Russia with all kinds of microelectronics technology that Russia is in fact using in this war. They're not, as far as we know, providing actual weapons to Russia, but the components of weapons, certainly. They back Russia up in all international fora, although they themselves have not recognized, for instance, even the annexation of Crimea. But Putin understands that Russia is the junior partner in this relationship. It's very asymmetric. Russia's far more dependent economically on China than vice versa. But still, bilateral trade has more than doubled since the war began. And China, we know, really does not want Russia to lose this war. And I think even if you listen to what Foreign Minister Wang said to Foreign Minister Lavrov in their meeting in Beijing before the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting begins, saying we support Russia in everything that it's doing. Because what the Chinese fear is that if Russia were to lose the war and Putin was somehow replaced by another leader, that leader might reconsider Russia's foreign policy orientation and want to become less dependent on China and interact more with the West.
We've heard from China and Russia calling their relationship a no-limits partnership and that the two leaders are friends of steel. But are there limits to this partnership? But what would China do if it really was slapped with 100% in secondary sanctions? I know that China is not scared of tariffs because for its own sanctions, or I should say its own tariffs with the United States had gone as high as 145%. But what would this 100% from Russia do to China?
The Chinese, the furthest they've gone so far was to warn Russia fairly directly when Putin was talking about potentially using tactical nuclear weapons in Ukraine. We did hear from Xi Jinping that that Russia should not do that. But the Chinese have not even been willing to play the role of mediator to try and solve this conflict, even though I think the Americans and the Europeans would have been quite happy if the Chinese would have stepped in and done that. But they haven't done it yet. So it's hard to imagine that that China would put that much pressure on Russia in order to avoid 100% tariffs. As I said, they might then think about other ways of retaliating against the U.S., but they seem to be pretty solid backers of Russia. Just, in their own interest, they do not want Putin to lose this war. They don't want instability in the Eurasian region. And they're also, again, looking to see how this ends in terms of their own ambitions vis-a-vis Taiwan.
Do you think that the Ukraine war is a friction point or a point of tension in the Sino-U.S. relations?
In Sino-U.S. relations, yes, I think so. I think the main problem for the United States or for President Trump is the economic relationship, what he sees as an unfair economic relationship, and then also China's ambitions, regional ambitions, and identifying China as the major long-term threat to U.S. interests because of its ambitions in Northeast Asia.
We have a number of the foreign ministers having met recently in ASEAN in preparation for the SCO. This is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting, or I should say the summit in August. And in particular, Wang Yi, the foreign minister of China, had met with Sergei Lavrov, I believe now 3 times within the same week. How important is this relationship between China and the United States? And what are some of China's strategic goals in deepening its relations with Russia?
I mean, China's strategic goals in deepening the relationship with Russia is to a large extent, it's also kind of ideological, and Russia and China share the same grievances against the United States and the belief that they should usher in a post-West world where the U.S. cannot set the rules of the international order anymore. I think that's something where China and Russia very much agree. I don't think they have the same concept of what a post-West world would look like, because China would still want an international system with rules. It's just that China would have more of a say in devising them. Whereas I think Russia at the moment favors a kind of a post-West order, which is really a disorder and which really doesn't have rules. But they certainly, what binds them together too is this sense of grievance, particularly against the United States, against the West in general, and also that, you have 2 authoritarian leaders who are very allergic to Western countries criticizing them for what happens domestically, and they back each other up whatever they do domestically. And then I think the personal relationship between Xi and Putin really is rather important. I believe they've met 60 times altogether, either bilaterally or in multilateral fora since Xi Jinping came to power, which of course raises the question of neither of them were in office anymore. How would that affect the relationship? And of course they're of a similar age. But at the moment, I think those things all bind them together. But I think there probably are some limits to this partnership. And again, I think if Russia were to contemplate or actually use tactical nuclear weapons in this war, then I think that would become much more problematic for China.